Today I'm going to talk about what it's like to become a mother at 57. I am a mother of 4 beautiful children, 2 of whom are in heaven, 2 of whom are here. In 2016, my family was decimated by the death of my daughter Molly. It came out of nowhere. She was a healthy, vibrant 13-year-old girl with a brain tumor that none of us knew she had. In spite of several visits to the doctors, increasing symptoms, we met with little luck, and she spent her last day alive in an emergency room, basically falling asleep and never waking up. When I had my daughter Gracie, I decided at that moment that she needed a sibling. I had only planned on having one child. I was an older mom, or so I thought. And Molly and Gracie ended up being those siblings that are like 2 people in one soul, together all the time, super close. So raising Molly and raising Gracie was sort of a partner deal. They were together all the time. Gracie is the sweet, sort of innocent one. She's older, but you wouldn't know it in a conversation with them. She looks at the world through rose-colored glasses. Molly was scrutinizing everything, thinking things through. Her vocabulary was ridiculous at an early age, and she questioned everything. The 2 of them, because of this, were sort of the perfect balance. Molly was my mini-me. She was stubborn. She was insistent. She wanted everything to be fair, and she got angry when it wasn't. Molly and I argued a lot. She fought me on every turn. She was articulate and wanted to express herself, and my earliest memory of her telling me that she was angry with me was when she was about 2.5, and she wanted to write me a note to tell me how she felt. And so I gave her 2 crayons, red and black, and I said, "These are good colors for anger, Molly. Why don't you draw a picture?" And she covered that piece of paper with the red crayon. It was shiny, really bared down hard, and she drew a big black circle with a stick figure in it and a slash through it, and told me that's how she felt. And that was the beginning of it. When I look now at her little journal entries, all those things you can look at when your child is gone. And I would say it's equal parts, I can't stand my mother, and thank God I have my mother. So I would have to say, for the most part, we got along just fine. But Gracie was my soft, sensitive, sort of tender one, and Molly was the insistent, stubborn, it has to be my way. None of my memories with Molly are mellow. They're either charged with anger or charged with joy. Not much in the middle. So of course, hindsight is 20/20. And in looking back over Molly's entire life, I see 100 clues now that something wasn't right in her brainstem. Essentially, in the fall of 2015, Molly began experiencing really bad headaches. And she had a bout of Bell's palsy, which is when half your face goes numb. And it was attributed to Lyme disease. And she took, 30 days of antibiotics, and we treated what we thought was Lyme disease. And she had a host of other symptoms, which now present clearly as cranial pressure. But at the time, again, it's not what we were thinking about. That was the beginning. So she had the droopy face, and then it continued from there. So it progressed. Primarily, they looked like migraine symptoms. She would wake up in the morning with a pounding headache and feel nauseous. She'd have squiggly lines in her vision. So I immediately thought, oh, migraines. She would be working at her desk, and she would stand up and have to clutch her head and hold it for a minute because of the sharp pain. Or she would stand up and fall down because she was dizzy. Again, these were, at the time, things that we just sort of explained away as migraines. So we saw several doctors over these months, all in her pediatrics practice, but none were her doctor. As the winter went along, the symptoms just became worse. And so we went to the doctor probably once every 3 weeks, anyway, more than once a month, for February and March. Just, look, this is getting worse. Can we, asking. The doctors just had a range of answers for us. She's stressed out. She's too skinny. She's a teenage girl. She has a sinus infection. And again, all of these things seemed relatively logical, but there was a nagging in all of us that something wasn't being addressed. Then she would have chunks of time where her symptoms seemed to go away, which is also very common in cranial pressure. Things can settle down for a bit. The brain and the body is amazing at finding balance. Molly's body was incredible in terms of managing the size of the tumor that ended up being in her head. April, her symptoms exacerbated. They became much worse, and we started taking her to the doctors once a week. And again, we were really never offered an x-ray or a CAT scan or blood work. We were just week after week sort of sent away. May 1st, she woke up at about 3 a.m. with violent vomiting. We called 911, took her to the ER, where she laid on a stretcher for 16 hours, and they gave her medicine for pain, and she fell asleep, and she really essentially never woke up. And we asked again and again, can she please have a CAT scan? We really need a CAT scan or an MRI. We were put off, basically told that there was too much radiation in a CAT scan for kids, that she could have an outpatient MRI the next day, They'd keep an eye on her. So they wouldn't let us go home, but they weren't doing anything either. And what ended up happening is at about midnight, May 1st into May 2nd, the brain tumor that was in her head ruptured and she sort of died right before my eyes. That's something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. She was thrashing about and moving all over, and then she was completely still. And they got her heartbeat back and they rushed her in for a CAT scan at that point. At that moment, in the middle of the night there, they told us that if she were an adult, they wouldn't even pursue further treatment, but she's a child. So they sent us to another hospital to have the tumor removed, which we did. And I think their hope was A, get her out of our hospital, and B, maybe, just maybe, she'll be okay. And of course, she was not okay. You can't have a, lacrosse ball sized tumor explode in your brainstem and be okay. We have 3 moments of her death. It's an astounding story. So throughout the day in the ER, Molly became less and less responsive. They just kept saying she was asleep, but we couldn't wake her up. We'd shake her sometimes and would try to wake her up. At about 8 o'clock at night, they simply transferred us to pediatrics. So we get put up into pediatrics by about 9 o'clock. She's still essentially out of it. The nurse in pediatrics knew right away something was off. She came in several times asking Molly to wiggle her toes, wiggle her hands, when she could respond to these things initially. Kenny and Gracie went home. It was a school night. It had been school vacation week. And I stayed with Molly. And eventually the nurse had the doctor that kept telling us no on the CAT scan come back. And I heard them talking and I heard him say, yes, we need to get her down for a scan right away. So they cathed her because she had not urinated all day. And apparently this was an issue. When they catheterized her, I learned later that stimulated her brain in a way that irritated the tumor, and the tumor ruptured at that time. So what I was looking at was a child who moments before had been thrashing about in the bed, which is actually called myoclosis, which is a nervous system sign of dysregulation, like the nervous system's, danger, it's falling apart. I didn't know that at the time. I thought she was waking up. I was so excited. And I'm holding her hand and I'm chatting her up, and I look at her legs and I notice how still they are, and they look still in a way that I can't really describe, except it made the neck hairs stand up on my neck. So I looked up at her face. I was holding her hand, and she was yellow, like yellowish green, a color I've never seen on a face. And I asked the nurse, why is she yellow? And the nurse sort of looks at her, and I'm not paying attention to the nurse now, but I let go of Molly's hand and I go around to the other side of the bed. And I'm not quite sure why I did that, but I was quite anxious. And now she was sort of navy blue is the best way to describe it. Her lips were like dark blue, and her face was a bit lighter, but blue. So I started really losing it. And so the nurse pushed me out of the way and hit the button, code blue. And the room was suddenly full of people. And I was sort of pushed back to the bathroom doorway, and they got her heart beating again. So that's the first time that I saw Molly die. And we learned later on that is exactly when she died. They got her heart beating again, and they bagged her, so they were breathing for her, and took her down to CAT scan. So of course, at that point, I call Kenny and Gracie. They come back to the hospital. I call my mother. It's 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. We're just a mess, wondering what's going to happen. And so we meet with a neurologist who says we found a mass. And my initial feeling was, thank God. I knew something was wrong. I've known all day. What do we do now? And that's when he basically says we're too late. And I'm like, too late? It's almost 24 hours since I called 911. What do you mean we're too late? Like, what are you talking about? I think I described this in my memoir, that when I got this news, I heard this horrible noise. I couldn't figure out what the noise was, and it was me screaming, a really primal sort of guttural scream that I didn't have any logical realization that I was doing, and I heard it. And so they wanted to give me medicine, and my mother said no way. And so at that point, they told us they were going to transfer her to a different hospital and remove the tumor and hope that this would help. They had put a drain in to alleviate the pressure that the rupture had caused. And so we went to another hospital. Every emotion comes through: denial, panic, anger, abject fear. And now Molly was potentially dead. I went into Barb mode. I just boxed up anything that would get in my way of managing things, and I managed everything. Leaving our local hospital and driving an hour away to a different medical facility and spending 6 days there, while hundreds of Molly's friends and our people connected to us came to say goodbye to her, I just had to step into survival mode and take care of things. It's just my nature. And I think it's self-preservation as much as it is taking care of those around me. It took us about 2 days to have definitive proof that Molly would never wake up. When we found out that she wouldn't wake up, I was insistent that anyone who wanted to come say goodbye be allowed to do so. As I said, I would say probably 650 people came over the course of Tuesday through Friday of that week, the first week of May, to say goodbye to Molly. I will say that those days are probably a major reason why I'm okay as I can be right now, because I just spent 16 hours a day hearing amazing things about Molly that I wouldn't have known. I make an Otto Frank reference because he talked about reading his daughter Anne's diary and then learning about her, and he would never have known any of this had she been alive. I learned so much about Molly in those days that it really sustained me. The second time that we experienced Molly's death was when the doctors came in to prove to me that she wouldn't wake up. And actually in New Hampshire, if you're going to remove a minor from life support, you have to perform a series of neurological tests to show that the body is in fact dead. It was not fun to watch, but we all did. I watched, Gracie watched, Kenny watched. They do a range of things: pour water in the ear, rub a Q-tip on the eye, pinch the stomach really hard, things that would cause anyone who had any awareness or feeling in their body to flinch, and Molly didn't. And then they removed the vent, and she, wasn't breathing, and her CO2 went up, 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 and she never ever gasped for air. So that would be death number 2. And then we had to unplug her. We had to remove her from life support, which is not like you see on TV at all. You don't just pull a plug and there it is. There are IVs and liquids and bags and needles and shunts, and just the amount of things connected to Molly to keep that body looking beautiful and 13 and alive is hard to describe. And the whole process took about 45 minutes. Once she was completely free of everything and off the vent, I climbed into bed with her. And the heart, being this amazing thing that it is, keeps beating long after. So for Molly, it was about 15 minutes. So I was in the bed with her with my hand on her chest, and Kenny was next to the bed. Gracie, this was too much for Gracie, and Kenny and I took turns putting our hand on Molly's chest just to feel the heartbeat slowly disappear. And at noon on May 7th, it stopped completely. And so that would be death number 3. Then we had to leave her there, and that was really hard. Looking at your child, knowing they'll never wake up, you at least still have the body. And I know for me, that was a huge piece of being okay with it. I slept with her every night. I could smell her and touch her. I French braided her hair, all the things that we do with our kids. And then we had to leave her and come home without her. And that was a big corner shift. I have to say, grief is like a never-ending highway. It's straight, but it's not linear, if that makes any sense. And depending on how well you know somebody and how close you were to them will dictate how quickly you get to each exit and each sort of milestone in the process. 8 years later, I'm probably at exit 2, whereas many of Molly's friends and acquaintances are at exit 50 by now. How quickly you can come to terms with the loss and live without the person is really varies on the connection. And I think mums and siblings and dads go the slowest. While it looks like a straight, endless road, it's also all over the place. It makes no sense. The feelings that come up and the reasons they come up are unpredictable at best and horribly predictable at worst. And I had 2 really dark years. I drank a lot. I was on a pile of anti-psych meds to go to sleep, meds to wake up, meds to calm down, meds to be active, meds to focus, meds to not panic. And I drank like a fish. I could get to about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that was as long as I could go without having a drink. And that was my reality for 2 years. I didn't go back to work for a long time. At the same time, I took care of Gracie. We slept on the living room floor. We made a floor bed and slept there for 2 years. Gracie and Molly shared a bedroom. The upstairs bathroom was where she got sick all the time. Neither of us could take it. We slept downstairs. We used the downstairs bathroom. I was able to take care of her. She was a high school freshman when this happened. Kenny would get up and go to kidney dialysis. We were 3 people living in one house, but really not connected to one another at all. At this time as well, we were involved in medical malpractice lawsuit against the hospital, which is also a very ugly procedure. It's no fun for anybody. However, it gave us focus, and it gave us something to work on, and it gave us a chance to talk about Molly. I think one of the hardest things for grieving families around child loss is people assume talking about your child will make you sad. And we're already sad. I'm never not going to be sad. It's 2024. I'm still sad. I love talking about Molly. It validates the fact that she was here. So this process was helpful in that regard. It helped us to talk about her. It was during this time, and this is a key piece for the Jack piece of the story, that I started having these insistent and recurring dreams about having a baby. And my logical thought was that I'm nuts. I've lost a child. I'm taking a gazillion drugs. I'm not okay. I want my daughter back. I don't want this life. I don't know what to do. I started having this dream. So I ignored it for a couple of months, just put it out of my mind as a symptom of my grief journey. I was driving home I coached cross-country runners at a nearby high school, and I was driving home from practice one afternoon. Drove by Molly's middle school, where she should have been an 8th grader. And that was never an easy drive-by for me. And it was right around there that this unbelievably loud voice, and I will sound crazy sharing this part of the story, but this big voice filled my car and essentially said, make an appointment and have the baby. And so I pulled the car off the road because it startled me. Like, did it come out of the radio? Like, am I psychotic? So I pulled off the road and I called my doctor, my OB, and made an appointment. So at the end of 2016 into 2017, while Gracie was muddling through school and while Kenny was living his, trying to stay healthy physically, I started going to the doctor and looking into, could I have a baby? I was 53 at the time. And I found through a friend of mine, IVF clinic that focused or included older women over 50. And so I made an appointment there, and I went down and met this amazing doctor who walked me through everything I would need to do before I would even get approved. And so I did all of those things that I needed to do. I had a colonoscopy, I had a mammogram, I had an EKG, I had a psychological eval. One of my biggest criticisms is that how dare I take that risk? I never took a risk. I wouldn't have been allowed to take a risk. You really sign off on that in the very beginning of the process. When it was all said and done, by this time I had pulled Kenny into the mix, simply because I thought if I really were going to follow through and have a baby, it would be much better to do it as a family and not some secret thing I was doing by myself. And he was very, very affable and amenable to the idea. I think it gave him something to feel hopeful about. In 2018, lawsuits settled, life calming down, being at the point in grief where you realize for sure Molly's never coming back. She's never coming back. We've talked about her. We've settled our legal issues. It's over. She's never coming back. This is a turning point, or it was for me, where I had to make a decision. I can stay just how I am, messed up and tired and medicated and intoxicated, or I can figure it out and get better. And so at about this time, the baby dreams had recurred quite a bit. And so I thought, all right, now is the time. I spent about 3 months coming off all that medication, which was incredibly difficult. And heading into 2019, I was feeling better than I had felt physically in a long time. In 2018, 2 years after Molly's death, I began the IVF process. In the process of seeing whether I was in fact healthy enough and physically able to have a baby, it was discovered that I had a brain tumor, a sizable brain tumor that would need to be removed. I found an amazing neurologist in New York City who was willing to not only heal a mouth condition in my face that precipitated the MRI that found the brain tumor, he was also willing to remove the brain tumor. The result of these surgeries would require him to sign off on my health and well-being, neurologically speaking, as at this time a 55-year-old woman endeavoring to have a baby. And after the tumor was removed, my mouth condition was repaired, and I had healed. The summer of 2019 brought approval from this neurologist that I could in fact enter into the IVF process and have a baby. 2019 into 2020 brought our first round of IVF, which did not result in a baby. And 2020, the summer of 2020, IVF attempt number 2, in fact worked, and I became pregnant with Jack in August of 2020. So as I talk to you today, Jack is now 3 years old. He is a healthy, vivacious, articulate, active 3-year-old boy. Kenny has had a kidney transplant, which was part of our whole process with having Jack. He is healthy and well, actually healthier than he's been probably in 10 years. I'm healthy and well. I'm 60 years old, and I can still nurse my 3-year-old, never wants to stop son Jack. As an athlete, a competitive athlete my whole life, I get a big charge out of the fact that I have this body that is amazingly able to not only grow a child at 57, but feed him throughout his young life. So that's something I'm enjoying very much. Gracie is the best big sister in the world. And quite honestly, in a room full of people, Gracie is always Jack's first choice. You would think it would be mom, but that's not necessarily the case. While I was pregnant with Jack, and shortly after his birth, I teamed up with a wonderful author who sort of helped me, co-wrote with me my memoir around losing Molly and having Jack. And I call the memoir Motherland, because in my experience as a mother, I feel sometimes like I'm a resident of a country that is vast and unknown sometimes. It has mountains, it has prairies, it has oceans, all of these things metaphors to being a mother. In my motherland experience, I've lost a child suddenly and traumatically, and I've had a child way after most people have their babies. What I hope people who read it get from it is whatever they need in their version of motherland, or what they need in understanding people in their lives that have either lost children or are struggling with fertility or wanting to have babies later in life. I think sometimes sharing the hardest parts and the best parts can be equally important. I just hope that it gives validity to whatever the reader is thinking, whoever's holding the book in their hands or listening to it. What I hope for the readers as I wrote it was that they could read something that made sense to them or validated a feeling or an experience in their life. The grief process, especially around child loss, but any traumatic event, it's human nature to want to fix it for the person who's sad. It's human nature to want to give them 50 ways to cheer up. It's human nature to want to distract them. And when people ask me, what advice would you give to somebody who's grieving? I would say to trust your gut, to feel whatever you want to feel, regardless of what people tell you. If you need to stay in bed all day and cry, then stay in bed all day and cry. If you need to rage and throw a rock through the wall, then rage and throw a rock through the wall. My biggest advice there, in terms of having a baby and actually being a woman in a world that wants to control what happens to women medically, I would say to be a firm advocate for yourself, to not back down, to find doctors and nurses and practices and physicians that will listen to you, that will take you through those necessary first steps. I think it's most important for me. The best aspects of my journey and what made it so positive for me was I was lucky enough and insistent enough to find doctors that sat and listened, that heard me and listened before they came back with what they thought should happen next. The things that have helped me the most are the friends in my life and the people in my life who have just been willing to sit with me, who have just been willing to acknowledge that I am where I am and not try to get me to feel anything else. I think one of the most profound experiences I had early on after Molly died was a friend of mine came over and I was a basket case. And she pulled 2 lawn chairs under this tree and she pulled me off the blanket. I was on the grass and she put me in a chair and she sat in the other one and she put my legs in her lap and she just held my legs. And I played on my phone and I cried and I fell asleep. And she sat for probably 5 hours under a tree in my yard while I just did what I did. She just let me be.